Well, everyone, it's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this is another segment of All Time Great. And we're going to be talking about one of the most famous, most successful animation studios ever, and that is Pixar. And joining me is animation aficionado, one of my best friends, Joe. Thank you so much for coming on.
How you doing?
Obviously the perfect choice to bring on to talk about animation is Joey T and talking about some animation and why Pixar really is one of the all-time great studios in film. So Joe, starting off, what are your thoughts on the idea like they were the trendsetter in terms of computer generated animation?
Well, so talking about it, I think it's very easy for us to go into a conversation of like who's the best and why they're the best, and of course you're going to
Mhm.
run into the issue of like, okay, you're going to have your own reasons for that. So when thinking about like what makes Pixar the best, right, when it comes to computer animated films, let's just get the one right off the bat. They are the first studio to produce a fully animated CG movie. Because
Mhm.
up to that, you have special effects coming out that are
Yep.
still blending computer animation. And I would even argue Casper toyed with the idea of having CG characters that were cartoony per se, but there never really was up to that point, 2D animated characters were cartoon characters. You
Yep.
never had a film be produced that way. And at one point, I was watching Steve Jobs promo video. Like every year, he does his conference talking about
Mhm.
products. And one year, he brought up Jurassic Park, explaining that this movie is could used these many frames of animation. Our movie is looking to triple that, and he's talking about Toy Story. And
Mhm.
then he basically had the layout for it. They had all the tools for it, and they were able to produce something that not only is quotable till today, not only is still appealing to look back. I mean, sure, there's certain things in there that probably don't hold up, but that's
Mhm.
just generally what you expect from films that are made older. But
Yeah.
from the moment I saw the trailer as a kid, and the one thing I'll always remember is seeing Woody talk to the toys. And I watched that, and my 5-year-old mind was like going nuts, figuring out like, what am I looking at? Is this drawn? Is this a live action? And then up to that point, that's what they did. They produced the first fully CG animated film. That, yes, is it the best animated film ever made? Probably not, but it's still the movie to do it that was commercially successful, critically successful, and inspirational when it comes to just storytelling and the process for anybody. And
Mhm.
like that's what we say when we come up thinking about the greatest studio. We think about the studio that does the first something,
Yep.
because Disney was the first studio to make the first fully animated movie. I mean, up to that point, you could argue about Prince Ahmed, but the thing is no one knew that movie existed, and it didn't have wide distribution. Snow White, on the other hand, is the movie to be able to do that and hit all
Mhm.
those points together. And it also just kind of extends to not just animation too, but like any studio that does the first thing, right? Because the thing that I think about is like A24. Like they make accessible indie movies that are for everybody. And it did start off with Tusk. It, not critically successful, but it is, setting that tone over we're going to make our movies our own way, but we're also going to take things that everybody in the mainstream does appreciate. So that's
Mhm.
kind of where I'm going with when I'm saying that Pixar, as being the trendsetter, they did the first and they did it so well. They hit it out of the park. And that's what makes them so good.
Well, and they changed everything
Mm-hmm.
because Hercules, Tarzan, Hunchback of Notre Dame, you start seeing computer generated animation being
Yeah.
moved in there. That Hydra, how it was moving and everything, and
Yeah.
looking at just those different kinds of elements being brought into the mix.
Yeah.
And then obviously Disney just stopped. They stopped
Yeah.
making 2D animated films, and for better for worse, obviously there's still some studios out there that do, like Cartoon Saloon, that do make 2D animated films and stuff like that. But Pixar changed everything, and Toy Story changed everything. And yeah, are the human beings grotesque? Yes. But like it's that kind of thing where sure, this was 1995 and now brand spanking new animation. And back then it's like, oh my god, it's a human. And
Yeah.
now it's like, are they human?
And
But
the thing about it too, though, is like they were clever with it. They were clever
mm,
with how they would really. Andy was the only human that you would. Andy and Sid were
yeah.
really the only characters you would focus on.
Mm,
Whereas Sid, because he's just generally a grotesque kid, it made
yep.
sense to see him a lot. But for the most part, characters are obscured. Like when they go to the theme, when they go to
Yeah.
the arcade, you'll see legs every once in a while. You barely ever see children in in an arcade, but you still get a sense with the noises and the loudness that it's a crowded area. But it's also obscured from the toys perspective.
Because the
Yeah,
movie is about the toys. The
exactly.
movies are about the toys, the monsters, the fish, the cars,
Mm-hmm.
and a rat, a
Mm-hmm.
robot, and something Pixar does.
Yeah.
And something else that you brought up too, what makes it so impressive is not only the approach to animation, but just the innovations in animation and details and why that makes Pixar so great.
Yeah. So like, I think it's interesting because I think it's very easy for some studios to falter when they can't keep up with the times. And they are making really good movies. Like, I mean, I do think about DreamWorks when they were kind of going through their transition, and eventually they only made like what, 3 or 4 hand drawn movies before just going into CG territory.
Mhm.
Um, but with Monsters Inc., for example, you have a movie that could have been like a standard CG movie. Like they don't need to have textures or highly. It could be like it could be like Toy Story all over again with the details that they had already. But
Yeah,
the animators went out of their way to try to develop new technology to create fur that reacted like real fur and felt like real fur. And without that, I don't think we would look at Monsters Inc. the same way we would look at it today. I mean, Kitty, right? Kitty wouldn't be so
mhm.
fluffy with like, ragged edges or anything or being a bald dude, right? It would, it
Just
really,
imagine Sully as like a smooth skin, purple and blue monster.
right. It wouldn't work.
It's a different vibe, but no, he's a big
But it would
fluffy
be
guy.
exactly big and fluffy, which I said Muppets early on is like what the movie kind of captures, but like it also harkens to what the short Feed the Kitty that did inspire the movie for the most part, where the little cat and the big dog are like really best friends. Like
Mhm.
it's a creative choice. You don't need to do it, but by doing it, you enhance the storytelling, you enhance the details. It's like when you're reading a good book, you read a
Mhm.
good book because it focuses on showing and not telling. The good stories we focus on are the ones that really put you into a world, you know? That's why I
Like
still give Dune a chance, even the later ones.
it's like we don't need the movie to tell us that Sully is a big, warm, fuzzy monster. We see that. And
Mm-hmm.
like Merida in Brave, how many animators did they have to just do her hair? And that meant something. Like being able to have those textures and even stuff like how photorealistic the animation has gotten. Like even like the good like Good Dinosaur, which
Yeah,
a lot of
that
people
gets shit
hate.
on a lot. Excuse my language, but that movie gets crapped on a lot.
It does, and it's a shame because honestly, that was not made for kids. When you have Sam Elliott T. Rex talking about how he drowned a gator, and drowned in his own blood, I'm like, um,
Well, the raptor, right? The
oh yeah,
raptors are like heroin addicts.
yeah, it's like that was a western. Just happened to have
Yeah.
dinosaurs, but like the dinosaurs are like fun and kid movie looking, but those landscapes and everything look so real. And Brave wouldn't work. the way that it does if it wasn't for Merida's hair and for capturing Scotland the way that it does. It's like
Yeah,
it just wouldn't work in that way. And they've been to being able to advance animation details to a whole new level. And it's ridiculously impressive to the point where it's like you just watch anything Pixar does anymore, and it's just
yeah.
so incredible and so amazed by what they're able to do.
It's interesting you say that too, because like, two things I want to say in response to that is like, with a good dinosaur, I think the same critics that will pan a good dinosaur will also be the same critics that will praise Terrence Malick's next movie. When you really get down to it, at its core, The Good Dinosaur was trying to be a Terrence Malick movie by focusing on wide details, wide scenes, and for the most part, characters that are ambiguous, not always having a clear, happy ending, right?
Right.
That's where, again, that's why I want to go too distracted, but like I think that movie is definitely very misunderstood. But
Yeah.
also, like, you know, we were talking about it before too. Finding Nemo might be the first animated movie that primarily focuses on fish, because up to that point, you think about that one movie with Don Knotts where he's a fish, but he's still a human
Yeah.
becoming a fish. But they had to go out of their way to create the Australian coral reef to be
Mhm.
able to essentially tell the story of characters that we rarely ever focus on or ever appreciate, unfortunately.
Well, and I think this is a good transition into innovating of storytelling because they're not telling stories about little kids going on adventures. They're not telling stories about even humans. So
Yeah,
many of their films are focusing on non-human characters, whether it's robots in Wall-E, or rats in
yeah,
Ratatouille, Finding Nemo, like you brought up, or Cars, where they're literal cars. It's and even like Inside Out has very human elements, but like who are the main characters? The emotions inside
yeah,
us. They're
yeah.
not human beings. It's the
Right.
emotions inside the human beings that are the actual main characters. It's something so fascinating that Pixar has taken such a different approach to things, and it's really worked out for them.
Mhm. It's interesting you say that too, because you know, the first thing I think about, like when we're talking about trend setting, right, when it comes to like what establishes a studio, it kind of goes back to this point as well too. Um, think about like Marvel Comics in the '60s. The only reason why these characters lasted for as long as they did was because up to that point, superheroes were not doing anything inventive. They weren't doing anything different. They were perfect. They were perfect beings. Clark Kent
Mhm.
was the perfect Superman.
Yep.
Batman might be human, but he's also the smartest and richest detective. Flash is the fastest. Yada yada yada. Who were the main characters of the Marvel comics? They were monsters. They were people like the Incredible Hulk is a monster created
Mhm.
by radiation. Spider-Man gets his powers from a bug that people don't really like or even really celebrate, and he's a teenage kid. Like these are
Mhm.
like more nuanced things that we don't put a lot of attention to, but for the most part, why aren't we putting enough attention to? If we don't talk about these things or talk about these issues, like in the X-Men with racism, right?
Yep.
Or like social prejudice, how else are we going to understand and grow? And to me, that's what good storytelling does. It sheds aside to something that's going on in our worlds that we don't really focus on. And for the most part, am I saying that Pixar movies are also touching up on complete issues like racism and prejudice? Kind of, but they do touch up on issues of acceptance,
Yep.
friendship, having to deal with people that you don't necessarily always want to spend time with, right? Or even if we go back to Finding Nemo, realizing that you have to get out of your comfort zone, but also trust the unknown, and your guide is going to be a person with short-term memory loss,
Yeah.
to help get your son back.
Well, and even though the characters are not human a lot of the time, and especially not kids a lot of the time, they still deal with very human things. Like Toy Story is about what happens when a new friend comes into your friend group and everybody's like, they're the cool new friend. What's going to happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we experience those things as human beings. A
Yeah.
bug's life is about being different and
Hmm.
being shunned by society for it, and how far you'll go to make up for it. And that even because like A Bug's Life is a remake of Seven Samurai. The prejudice, like they have to hide that, like hiding of like the fact that they're circus performers, which
Yeah.
also, Flick doesn't realize they're circus performers, but they don't want people to know they're circus performers. And there's a lot of prejudice in Seven Samurai towards the Ronin, the samurai. And it's like they find these levels of storytelling, and then some of these films hit on a deeply personal level. Like, God, Coco and films like that, just the first 10 minutes of Up, if you've ever loved in your life, I just feel like that experience. And honestly, that's segueing into like my biggest thing is they had emotion like nobody else's business. Like this side of like Bambi's mom, how many movies like you have Bambi's mom and probably Mufasa? Like if you think of Disney canon, those are like the big emotional moments. Almost every single Pixar movie has those moments in it. And it's just like the Barracuda, the beginning of Finding Nemo, or Toy Story 3 punches you in the face with the furnace scene and then kicks you in the privates with the whole him giving away his toys thing. Up's first 10 minutes had people bawling their eyes out in the middle of a theater.
Yeah.
And bing bong. Like you could just say bing bong to somebody and people will get upset.
Hmm. Hmm.
That that's the power of emotion and impact that Pixar has, that they're like watching Monsters Inc. That moment where he has to say goodbye to Boo, and then like the tease right at the very end of the movie where it's just like, oh, it's just there's so much emotion to it, and that's what's so incredible about what they're able to do with their films is connect so deeply on an emotional level.
It's interesting that you say that too, because I think it also does feed into like the aspect of the storytelling, right?
Mm,
When it comes to these characters that they're developing, and it comes to their why and I think any writer or any person working on a story always has to focus on what their why is and like what they're trying to overcome. And
mhm,
for each of the Pixar movies, I think they make it very clear as to like you said with Woody, his why is accepting where his role is amongst his friends and his community, and it
mhm.
becomes the central theme for all the Toy Story movies. I know we joke about the lore over like what makes a toy come to life, whereas I think the lore does kind of focus on meaning of life and what
Yep.
gives you meaning. Being a toy for someone's enjoyment is your meaning in life, which they talk about in the fourth movie, which
Well,
is
even
kind
in the second one, is being preserved in a museum
of. Mm-hmm.
a worthwhile life for a toy?
Mm-hmm. That movie would have been
And
so much darker if they showed a montage of collectibles in museums.
mhm,
They're
where
gonna
it's
do
just like,
that.
well, Joe, they already had the whole Jesse's
That's
girl
true.
sequence where she got left behind. I don't know if
Essentially.
they could like hit even more emotionally.
Oh,
It's like,
test
what are we gonna
audiences.
do to these kids?
Exactly. Test audiences would have went nuts back then if they did that.
But like,
Um,
well, they did love it because they wound up putting it in theaters, right?
yeah, it
Because
was supposed to be
that
direct to video.
was supposed to be one of those straight to VHS
Uh-huh.
releases, and it's like so glad that they didn't. But
Yeah.
no, it's just so much emotion is expressed, and they know how to tell a story, and they know how to affect people.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the last big point that I have here is just quality. Like, take a step back. Everybody has their own perspectives and their own taste, but legitimately, how many Pixar movies are just outright bad movies?
Cars too.
Basically, Cars 2 is consistently the only one that the vast majority of people think is a straight up bad movie.
Hmm.
Obviously, people have feelings about certain ones are overhated, like we talk about Good Dinosaur. I feel like what was the one that came out literally right as COVID was happening?
Uh,
Um
Onward.
Onward. Like that got crapped on a lot.
Yeah,
That movie made my wife cry multiple times as somebody who lost her dad when she was 4 years old.
yeah, and that
So
was
like,
before that too. Yeah,
mhm. But like, there's like the prequels and sequels. People be like, "Oh, they shouldn't have made sequels and stuff like that." But like, let's be fair here. They've made some of the greatest sequels of all time with the story movies,
they
and
did.
it's just an insane track record of
Yeah,
quality of film. How many studios can say that they have like a 950 winning percentage?
that's interesting you say that because you would argue that Disney was the reason why they did that for such a while. Because if you go back, there's a great illustration, like a timeline of animated movies from 1930 to 2000, and
Mhm.
basically they show an uptick in the 90s because that's when studios were realizing they can make movies cheaper and quicker, right? But up to that point, only movies that were being produced was Disney,
Yeah,
right? So they really had no excuse to say that we're because they were the only market there. But you
yeah.
have Pixar with a much wider market, like you said, with a higher batting average.
Well, it's the kind of thing where it's like I even tried to look back and explore more older animated films and like outside of Disney, you don't find a whole lot before the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have the Ralph uh was it
Actually,
Basky?
I think
Yeah.
it's either.
So like you have those Lord of the Rings films, you have The Hobbit, you have the 80s starting to get into like Rankin
Hanna Barbera.
Bass. Like Rankin Bass making some other films that aren't just, holiday TV specials. And then
Last
Tom
Unicorn.
Bluth.
That was my mom's favorite movie for a long time.
Mhm. And then you have Tom Bluth in the
Mm.
late 80s and the 90s. But like it was Disney. And then Disney from like 89 until what, probably like close to 99 was just like they're just putting out incredible films. And it was the early 2000s where Pixar was like, no, this is our town now. Because
Yeah.
like if you look at the first the first year they had an Academy Award for animation, the three nominees, none of them were Disney.
And it was Shrek that won.
Yep.
It ain't
Me
over till it's
personally
over,
have
man.
it. You have Shrek from DreamWorks, you have Jimmy Neutron from Paramount Nickelodeon, and you have Monsters Inc. from Pixar. Where's
Yeah.
Disney? The next year, Spirited Away.
Hmm.
Where's Disney? Next year, Finding Nemo. Where's Disney? It's that kind of thing where it's like we got into a period of time where like Pixar was the big animation studio
Wait a minute. What was the first Disney animated movie to win the
to
Academy?
win.
Was it Frozen to win? I think it may have
That's
been
crazy.
Frozen.
It might actually be.
Holy smokes. That's like that's like over 10 years of of being snubbed or not recognized. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the nominees list because like that is a really big point, and that's crazy.
Yeah, and
But
also
it was Pixar. So like yeah, it was Shrek beat Jimmy Neutron and Monsters Inc. Spirited Away beat Lilo and Stitch. So and Treasure Planet and Spirit and Ice Age. Finding Nemo beat Brother Bear and the Triplets of Belleville. The Incredibles beat Shark Tale and Shrek 2. Damn, 2004, Shrek 2 and The Incredibles. Wallace and Gromit beat Corpse Bride and Howl's Moving Castle. Happy Feet beat Cars and Monster House. Ratatouille beat Persepolis and Surf's Up. There's a stretch here where Disney didn't even have anything nominated.
Right.
Wally beat Bolt and Kung Fu Panda. Up beat Coraline, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Princess and the Frog, and The Secret of Kells. Toy
Yeah.
Story 3 beat How to Train Your Dragon and The Illusionist. Rango. Nickelodeon on.
Nickelodeon beat Disney. Nickelodeon has an animated feature before Disney did. That's crazy.
It literally was Frozen for 2013.
Get the
But
heck
then they
out
had
of here.
Frozen, Big Hero 6, won back-to-back years. Zootopia in 2016.
Yeah, and that was when people were saying
Encanto in 2021. Disney's only won like four
that's crazy.
because it's Pixar. Ever since that award became a thing, it was Pixar's to win.
Yeah,
And you'd have like the Spirited Away, the Rango, the Happy Feet,
yeah,
the Wallace and Gromit. But that's the legacy Pixar has.
yeah.
And damn Disney for trying to taint their legacy by just making them a straight to Disney Plus outlet since
Mhm.
COVID. And it's just so frustrating. It'll be interesting to see if Pixar comes back with winning this year
Yeah,
with Inside Out 2 because
I think they would.
I'm trying to think like this isn't doesn't seem like a crazy big year for animation,
No, no, not really. I mean, other than like Despicable Me 4, Kung Fu Panda 4,
which to,
fourth, there
which
was two fourth movies. That's interesting.
which yeah, and both of them were
Yeah, not that good, unfortunately.
fine. But it'll be interesting the Wild Robot to see how that turns out. But no,
Yeah,
like this might be Pixar bouncing back, but still Disney's just like, where are you?
it's interesting
Oh,
that
well,
you
they have
mentioned
Moana too.
and Moana too. Yeah,
So we'll have to see that. But like that's the legacy Pixar's created. I feel so bad for especially Soul,
I was gonna mention that movie because it's my
because
favorite.
Soul was great
Yeah,
and just got dumped on Disney Plus with that got dumped on Disney Plus with no fee, and then 3 months later, Raya got released for $30 because it was Disney animation. So Disney, since they got Pixar, have been purposefully trying to like screw them over.
it's interesting you say that because everybody assumes Disney and Pixar are synonymous, and if you look at the history, Disney and Pixar have actually, even though they distribute the movies, there's actually been a lot of controversy as to
Mm.
their handling of their movies. Where Pixar, even the studios themselves.
Yep.
Pixar's up in Silicon Valley. That's nowhere near Burbank. That's like three or
Mm-mm.
4 hours, 5 hours away. There in North California, if you've ever been to that side, is a completely different vibe from
Yep.
South California, where Disney Animation is and Disneyland is. That's where you get the stereotypes of the surfer dudes versus the get ready to go to work, and then I'll be a surfer dude.
The
That's
nerds,
nerds.
all the nerds and their calculators go into Pixar Studios to make their 3D animated movies. But no, Pixar has amazing quality, have been ruling the roost for the past God, 30 years, Joe. Are we gonna go see Toy Story for its 30th anniversary next year in theaters?
I would love to do that. I want to go see. I mean, no, I was gonna say Beetlejuice, but that'd be too off the rack, like too crazy tangent. But like, I'm down to go see Toy Story. Like, again, I bring it up as being the trendsetter, but it's still a really good movie.
Yeah. Which I'll say with all four of them, it's my least favorite as an actual film, but like it's still better. So many other animated movies and just
Yeah,
movies in general. That's the quality of Pixar.
yeah,
Like Incredibles is one of the greatest superhero movies, period. Like
yeah,
not just like animated. It's period. It
Yeah.
somehow was able to do the idea of like a family of superheroes better than any Fantastic Four movie's been able to do up to this point.
A little bit of cross promotion because this week, Nostalgia Critic actually did a review of The Incredibles, and he brings up that point because what the Fantastic Four movies never did was focus on crime fighting. You get crime fighting in The Incredibles. In fact, you also get a lot of drama. Like to me,
Yeah,
I look at why Brad Bird is directed Mission Impossible because he directed Mission Impossible through doing The Incredibles.
yeah,
Like that
absolutely.
plane scene is legit.
It's the thing, like, if you think about Rise of the Silver Surfer, it's like an hour and 37 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's all plot.
Mm-hmm.
It like has very little space to do anything of character. Like there's
Yeah,
fleeting moments, but it's
yeah,
all plot and no substance.
yeah.
And The Incredibles, it spends that time setting up this family, and I love Incredibles too.
I
And
do.
I think that was a great sequel too. And also a lot of people thought so too. It made a shit ton of money.
it the only fault that Incredibles 2 had was expectation because this is the sequel that came out 14 years afterwards and a lot of people had a lot of ideas as to where the story would go,
Hmm.
whereas where that story ended up going was okay. I would still argue it is not as big as Incredibles was when it comes to like themes and what they were trying to do, but it still kept it's still focused on the characters and it's still focused on things that were addressed in the first movie. I really just didn't think people expected the movie to take place right after Incredibles 1.
Yeah. And it sure did. The Underminer.
Yeah, like just right off the bat, we're going straight into it, which also does give the Fantastic Four vibe where it's like, oh, next issue, with where are we going? And that's what I
On
liked
to the
about
next one. You
it. On
have
to
a
the next
cold
one.
open of one antagonist. So that actually feels like a comic book.
Yeah.
So, but if you didn't know this already, Pixar is one of the greatest studios in the history of film and one of the most important studios in animation, which I also want to make one quick point, not to start a conversation, but realize that there's more than just Disney and Pixar.
Mm.
There's there's Cartoon Saloon. There's so many other animation studios out there that you should check out stuff from. So just
Not
don't watch.
Illumination. A little known studio. You ever hear of? They have got something called Minions. You ever hear of them?
Oh, banana!
Ba-da-da.
Uh, sure, everybody's heard of them. They've seen them. Everyone.
They're everywhere.
Joe, thank you so much for coming on and chatting movies with me as always. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in, supporting your Slam reviewer.